faithfully sharing value, exploring great books worldwide. Hi, this is Sally with the Book Talk. On your days off, how much time do you spend at home watching shows or gaming versus going out to hang with friends and family? Probably a lot of folks prefer staying in rather than heading out. For Americans in the late 20th century, it was similar. They got used to spending free time solo at home. But Americans back then weren't like that. On rest days, they'd always go out, play cards or fish with pals, or tidy the lawn with neighbors, and chat about kids. In school performance, attend church services, join charity volunteer activities. On the surface, it's just a shift in how people relax. But this tiny change hides a big issue, whether people care about public life or feel responsible for the country. Today's book examines changes in 20th century American leisure, revealing a crisis in public life. This book's called Bowling Alone by Robert Putnam, a famous Western political scientist and former dean of Harvard's Kennedy School. Bowling Alone is one of his key works. Published in 2000, the bowling in the title is America's top competitive sport. Bowlers are twice as many as softball players and over 4 times tennis players. More importantly, everyone, young or old, married or single, workers or middle class, loves bowling. You could say bowling in America is like ping pong in China. By the late 20th century, with population growth, U.S. bowlers hit a record high, but team bowling plummeted. From 1980 to 1993, U.S. bowlers increased by 10%, but team players dropped by over 40%. That means more Americans chose to bowl alone. Originally, after bowling, they'd have beer, pizza, and chat together. Through socializing, they strengthened bonds and shared info. While bowling, our social capital grew. So-called social capital is a key concept in the book. It's a norm where people connect, help each other out, and build trust. Bowling solo doesn't create much social capital, but teaming up with friends or coworkers can. Bowling's just an example. Putnam used bowling alone to sum up this shift in American society. Back then, Americans were all about clubs, public debates, volunteering, and elections. They had plenty of social capital. By the late 28th century, social capital loss was a huge crisis. Putnam dug into solid stats like the National Election Study and General Social Survey. Also, the University of Michigan survey since 1952 found that from the 70s, social ties weakened everywhere, and social capital drained away. Next, I'll break it down with 3 key questions that build on each other. Now, first up, why does social capital matter? Second, how did social capital shift in the U.S. over the 1900s? Why'd this all go down? Lastly, what's Putnam's fix for building back social capital in the U.S.? Okay, question 1. Why should we care about social capital? Social capital? It's the benefits you get from solid connections with others. It can be yours personally or belong to a group, like bowling with pals boosts your own social stash. If neighbors in your community are tight-knit, the whole place gains more social capital. So, what's linked to social capital? Social participation. That means folks getting involved socially, formal ways like voting or campaigning, or informal ones like everyday work interactions. Like we said before, hanging out with buds for bowling. Basically, the more you get involved and stay active socially, the more social capital you build. Putnam shares a story to explain how social capital pops up and works in the real world. Imagine Bob and Mary, a couple with a 6-year-old son, Jack, just about to start grade school. Bob and Mary support public education in principle and want their child to grow up in a diverse environment. Growing up with kids from all kinds of social classes and cultural backgrounds. But the public elementary school near Bob's place is kinda messy. Teachers aren't very responsible, classrooms are old, and there aren't even computers yet. So, worried about education and the environment, Bob and Mary could choose to leave this public school and pay more to send Jack to a private one. Of course, they could also choose to stick around and try to improve the public school. Now, let's say Bob and Mary want to stay and fix the school. What can they do? They'd usually start a parent-teacher association at the school, which is a traditional social group, then they actively recruit as many people as possible. That's how social capital builds up. The more Bob and Mary know their neighbors and build trust, the easier it is to get more members. Suppose after a few months, 17 parents become active. What's next? They can lobby local government for better public education funding and reach out to other charities. Other charities can boost the school's infrastructure, host events, and strengthen teacher-parent ties. Through their hard work, everyone starts feeling more connected, like it's our school. As parents bond more, they'll carry those connections into other parts of life. A few families might spend weekends together, sharing kid updates or work stress. If Bob loses his job, he's got friends to lean on for help, encouragement, or job leads. Countless American communities used to work this way, with folks teaming up to better their lives. From this example, we've seen how social capital gets built and grows. So what's the real value of social capital? Putnam lists 5 key benefits. First, social capital helps education and kids' welfare. A state's social capital is vital for healthy youth development. Social capital can effectively prevent child abuse and keep teens from dropping out. It prevents teenage boys and girls from engaging in early sexual relationships while hanging out on streets.
Lots of data shows where child abuse is common. Parents rarely help each other with childcare or let kids play nearby, clearly from distrust.
Even in wealthy, cultured communities, if adults don't connect, kids perform poorly in education. Second, social capital enhances community safety. Where social capital is high, public spaces are cleaner, people friendlier, streets safer, lower crime and fewer violent incidents. Traditional views blame high poverty or mobility for threatening safety. But Putnam's data comparisons show insecurity mainly comes from adults avoiding groups, not knowing neighbors, and kids growing unsupervised. Many teen crime studies show delinquency often stems from boredom, not poverty. They lack proper supervision or ways to engage socially. Churches abandoned, clubs dissolved, social networks collapsed. Putnam warned Americans this decay was rampant in late 20th century suburbs and rural schools. And frequent shootings were warnings. Wealth and education can't prevent collective disasters. Even middle-class communities lacking social capital can be unsafe. Third, social capital expands personal opportunities and boosts economies. Personally, social connections shape life opportunities. A job search study found casual acquaintances offer better opportunities than close family or friends because inner circles share similar info, while casual friends bring fresh leads. At community levels, high social capital also fuels economic growth. Silicon Valley's success is the prime example. As the global tech hub, despite company rivalries, leaders freely share problem-solving techniques within this community. After work, folks often grab drinks together, sparking trade associations, industry groups. Employees from different companies mingle, even with job hopping since so much info is already shared. Employee movement between firms actually strengthens relationships and social networks. Contrast this with Route 128 outside Boston, once Silicon Valley's rival, but companies there enforced strict hierarchies and interdepartment secrecy. Simply put, no company-to-company talk, little internal socializing. The community declined fast. Fourth, social capital improves health and happiness. Decades of public health research show more community ties mean fewer colds, heart disease, strokes, cancer, depression, you name it. Today, depression haunts Americans. Data clearly shows when social connections drop, depression and suicides rise. Life's never smooth sailing. When facing setbacks, leaning on family, friends, or church folks makes despair less likely. Another book example shows social capital's health link. In Pennsylvania, an Italian-American community had 0 sudden heart attack deaths since the 1950s. Unlike neighbors, researchers hunted for reasons. After checking diet, exercise, weight, genetics, they found tight-knit social ties were key. Founded in the 1800s by people from the same Italian village, they built a mutual aid society through local leaders. It had churches, Sports clubs, unions, its own newspaper, patrol units, parks, everything. In this close community, wealth flaunting got mocked. Family values and kindness thrived. Folks were happier, health issues spotted earlier with more support. Fifth, social capital fuels democratic participation, deep in America's political DNA. John Dewey, the famous American philosopher, once said, "Democracy must start locally, and that local place is your neighborhood community." Remember Bob and Mary? Their story is a perfect example. By starting a PTA, they brought the community together to improve public education. Social capital boosts democracy in two ways. First, it helps national politics. Groups, from churches to professional clubs, bowling leagues to PTAs, amplify small voices.
Marginalized groups can voice needs, demand government action, and keep power in check.
Second, social capital trains good citizens. Not everyone gets higher education. But in high social capital nations, joining groups builds civic awareness and skills. Through interaction, folks learn cooperation, tolerance, and other virtues.
In short, Putnam found social capitals everywhere in American life, fostering healthy communities and preventing chaos.
It also maintains basic democratic literacy among the public. So how did U.S. social capital change in the 1900s? By century's end, was it thriving or dying? We already know more social participation means higher social capital. So Putnam measured it by tracking Americans' social engagement over 100 years. First type, political participation. Voting, especially in presidential elections, is key. In 1960s Nixon-Kennedy race, turnout was 62.8%. By 1996, it plummeted to 48.9%. Putnam studied all the data and found something grim. Never before in recent centuries had so many willingly given up their vote. Beyond voting, Americans have tons of ways to get politically involved. A 1973 to 1994 study tracked 12 civic activities: signing petitions, attending meetings, rallies, writing Congress, all showed decline. Americans' political participation dropped across the board. By every measure, political engagement kept falling in the last 3 decades of the 20th century. Putnam calls the second type civic participation. Americans' love for forming and joining groups. When Tocqueville visited America early in the 1800s, he marveled. Americans constantly form associations, regardless of age, status, or interests. Tocqueville saw groups as democracy's engine. But what changed by late 1900s? Superficial optimism. Surface stats show volunteer groups rose from 1970 to 1990, seeming like Americans still loved associations. But more groups doesn't mean more participation. Many groups shrank. Average membership dropped to a tenth of original size.
Crucially, how often people attended meetings plummeted.
Mid-70s, nearly 2/3 attended group meetings. Late 90s, 2/3 never attended. So while America still has groups, actual participation crashed over 20 to 30 years. Putnam tells of the Dallas Charity Guild, formed in the 1940s. Members sewed and visited every Friday morning. This tradition lasted 57 years, but on April 30th, 1999, they held their last gathering. The group quietly ended. Average member age, 80, with no young recruits, it dissolved.
The Dallas Charity Guild.
Its lifespan mirrors America's community life, from boom to collapse.
The third key participation, religious. Churches hold unique status in American society.
Data shows nearly half of U.S. community groups linked to churches. Half of charity work and volunteering connects to religion. One pastor said, "A church isn't a building or institution. It's the bond between people." Take one church in the book. It ran diverse activities like AIDS prevention, AA meetings, women's groups. Putnam notes churches let underprivileged groups learn organizing, public speaking, make friends, even find jobs. Yet, even this vital path declined, starting in the 1970s. Over 30 to 40 years, church membership dropped 10%. Actual participation fell 25 to 50%. Religious institutions became hollowed out.
Fourth type, work-related social participation.
People spend more time working now, so has work-based social involvement risen? Sadly, no. Union membership peaked in the 50s and fell for 40 plus years. Plus, job instability killed chances to build solid work relationships. The 80s' fastest growing industry? Job agencies for the unemployed. Putnam recalls, back then, if IBM hired you, HR would say, discuss with your wife.
It wasn't just a job. You joined a family for life.
Today, shorter tenures, more part-timers and gig workers. So despite more work hours, work-based social capital didn't grow. Politics, clubs, religion, work, those are formal social participation.
Finally, informal participation, meeting friends, post-work drinks.
Tuesday poker nights, neighbor barbecues, even nodding to regulars during runs.
Putnam says these daily interactions build up social capital bit by bit.
But research shows Americans are visiting friends and family less each year. Well, in the 70s, Americans hosted friends at home about 14 to 15 times yearly. By late 90s, that number dropped to 8 times. Maybe they prefer dining out instead? Sadly, no. Restaurants, bars, and cafes per capita decreased while fast food joints surged. We know cafes are about chatting with friends, while fast food means rushing through meals. Like bowling alone, people now play bridge online. But online bridge focuses on gameplay. Its social aspect shrinks dramatically. In short, regular contact with friends' neighbors plummeted, dinner conversations dwindled, leisure activities enabling easy chat vanished too due to declining social engagement. Since the 1970s, America's social capital kept draining away and social trust kept falling. In 1952, 50% of Americans felt social morals were as good as before. This number actually rose through the 50s and 60s. But from the 70s onward, it started dropping.
By 1998, 3/4 felt morals were deteriorating.
Plus, people grew stingier with charity. Relative to income, 90s donations were lower than any time since 1940. New volunteers were mainly seniors over 60. As trust fell, aggression rose. From 1990 to 1996, aggressive driving, road rage, increased by 50%. In 1997, 74% of drivers felt others had become ruder and less courteous behind the wheel compared to 5 years prior, Putnam lamented. Today's Americans use security guards, guns, dogs, and locks against crime, all extra costs from lost social capital. In summary, shallow, superficial interactions gradually replaced deep, meaningful social bonds. American social connections often become self-serving, transactional one-offs. After such thorough examination of this grim reality, everyone wonders, what caused this shift? Many factors drove this change.
Here we focus on 3 key factors Putnam identified. First, mass media, especially TV. Putnam notes TV's immense destructive power on social participation.
First, TV consumes massive amounts of leisure time. In 1995, average household TV time was over 50% higher than the 1950s. From 1965 to 1995, weekly free time increased by 6 hours on average.
But nearly all that time went to TV, with households owning more sets.
Second, TV hampers social interaction. Even families watching together communicate less because people stare at screens, rarely talking. In bowling alleys with TVs, solo bowlers don't chat between turns. They just watch. Finally, TV prioritizes entertainment over serious topics. Hit shows like soaps and talk shows focus on fun. Though news exists, most viewers ignore it. Per Putnam, U.S. civic engagement declined and social capital drained, starting in the 70s. This problem emerged about a decade after TV's popularity surge. The TV-raised generation never formed group participation habits, making generational replacement the second key factor in social capital loss. Simply put, new generations replace older ones. As the saying goes, the new wave pushes the old. Data shows older Americans join social activities more than youth, volunteering en masse post-retirement. Thus, the most civilly minded generation ages out while the young lack social participation habits. Since the 1970s, generational replacement has borne most responsibility for America's social capital drain. So which generation was most community-minded? Research shows it's those born between 1910 to 1940. In the 1960s, they were in their prime, most active in social participation. That's why American social capital peaked in the 50s and 60s. This generation endured WA1 and post-war rebuilding, naturally valuing public life and believing unity brings strength. The post-war baby boomers born over the next 20 years were TV's first lifelong audience. Meanwhile, 60s political events like Vietnam and Watergate alienated them from politics. They craved freedom and embraced individualism, showing less regard for authority, religion, and patriotism. What about boomers' kids? Born in the 80s to 90s without major crises, they became more self-centered, raised on personalized entertainment like TV and video games. Growing up this way, they're less familiar with collective action. Clearly, each generation's environment differs greatly, and increasingly individual responses drained America's social capital.
The third major factor, suburbanization.
America's suburban wave began in the 1950s.
Compared to cities, suburbs offered cheaper land, affordable housing, tax breaks, and cleaner air.
So working in cities but living in suburbs became many Americans' choice.
But suburbanization, while giving bigger houses, harmed social capital.
First came longer commutes. Studies show U.S. adults average 72 daily car minutes, twice their kid time.
Second, the work-home separation forces tough choices.
Post-work beers with colleagues mean no time to greet neighbors. And suburbanites shop at malls, not local stores, slashing neighbor encounters. Third, social class and background. Similar people tend to move into the same neighborhoods. Long-term homogeneous environments, narrow worldviews, and information sources. Between classes, building social capital becomes difficult. Division outweighs cooperation. In short, Putnam found TV proliferation, generational shifts, and suburbanization bear major responsibility for America's social capital decline. So over the past 30 years, facing continuous social capital loss, what can Americans do to reverse this trend? Putnam notes, first, awaken Americans' collective consciousness to recognize community value. Second, inspire the public to find contemporary forms of social engagement. Specifically, he proposes 3 areas of recommendations.
First, social life. Putnam urges active participation, especially reshaping young Americans' civic awareness. Build social capital early. Also foster relaxed, trusting work environments.
He calls for less travel, less screen time, more time with loved ones and neighbors. Urges community planning with more public spaces, parks, and benches, creating conditions for more casual socializing. Second, cultural life. Use art to gather diverse people, singing or dancing together. Arts help different people connect. Religious communities should spark a new, diverse, socially conscious Great Awakening, making Americans more community-minded and tolerant.
Third, political life. Demands government enable direct local democracy participation, expanding social capital through public politics.
Not relying on pollsters or ad agencies, turning campaigns into money-burning games.
By overhauling social, cultural, and political life, Putnam hopes 21st century America can restore social capital to its 1950s to 60s peak. All right, that wraps up the main content of Bowling Alone. Let's summarize its significance.
Putnam's research sounded the alarm for American society.
Sure, technology's advanced, entertainment options multiplied, and incomes risen, but human connections weakened. Social capital erosion reduces life security, happiness, and heightens social instability risks. Former President Obama, as senator, closely followed Putnam's work, actively discussing community building and grassroots democracy. In 2013, Obama awarded Putnam the National Humanities Medal, proof of his profound insight into American society. Yet Putnam's impact extends beyond America. It sparked global resonance, perhaps because TV universally captivates people across nations. Younger generations' behaviors shifted dramatically, and urban sprawl separating work and home emerged worldwide. Translated into 20 or more languages post-publication, it became one of social science's most cited works in half a century. Key ideas like TV's social impact echo in the internet age too, as folks obsess over online connections, neglecting real-world bonds. This poses another layer of threat to public life. America's 20th century story still holds vital lessons for today's world. All right, that concludes our exploration of Bowling Alone. Reading notes are below the audio. Till next time.